I'm Bill Castle, and this is Free Expression. This program is all about conveying the Christian message from a Catholic point of view and defending the liberty which makes it possible to do that. We discuss the need to prepare Catholics to face challenges to the faith, and we explore the spiritual and physical aspects of a famous pilgrimage route. Join us, sit back and enjoy some free expression. It's becoming increasingly obvious how perilous a time we live in. Our church and Christian civilization in general are under fire from all sides. There are military and economic challenges abroad, and here at home, traditional moral norms are being overthrown, family relationships are undermined, churches are being attacked or desecrated. There's a film and an accompanying book titled Letter to the American Church by author and talk show host Eric Metaxas. Metaxas likens our situation to that of Germany before the Nazis. He issues a powerful call for pastors to stand up in defense of our Christian heritage and our First Amendment rights. What struck me when I recently viewed the film was how little we hear about serious threats in our Catholic parishes. Homilies, discussion programs, and catechetical materials may offer uplifting reminders about God's love, and that's great. We all need encouragement in our faith walk. But are Catholics being adequately prepared for the trials which really do seem to lie ahead? Michael Hichborn is president of the Lepanto Institute, an organization that is very much concerned with the defense of the faith. He's here now. Michael, thanks very much for taking a few minutes to speak with us.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's my pleasure.
Is my impression correct? Do church leaders seem to avoid acknowledging the extent of today's threats?
I think by and large the answer is yes. When you start looking at the focus of the church, especially since the 1960s, bishops, priests, cardinals, even popes have shifted away from the salvation of souls, which is the purpose and mission of the church, to a more nuanced focus on social justice. And so they're looking at, well, what can governments do to help people? And how can society come together in common cause, even when we don't believe the same faith? How can we come together to better our surroundings and make man in a more comfortable and better situation? And it sounds like a noble and lofty goal, but the problem is that that's not why the church exists. The church exists to save souls from sin. So when you start talking about social ills and social problems, but you don't talk about sin, well, not only do you weaken your own message, but then you start to weaken the purpose of the social justice stuff too, because it has no moral foundation other than to say, well, this is what we think.
I guess it's a special challenge in a society like ours, which has a plethora of religions, many Christian denominations. We do have to live together somehow. The founders certainly understood that. Does this in itself impede our church leaders from being more forthcoming?
Yeah, I do think so. The fact of the matter is, and I've made this argument for a very, very long time, is that a multicultural civilization cannot exist under the same set of laws. Once you have one culture that believes X morality and another culture that believes a morality that is counter to that, then automatically under the same law, one of those must be oppressed. You wind up with a situation where there is a system of laws that apply to everyone equally. However, you're always going to have a subset of those people who say that we are being oppressed because we believe one thing, but not this other thing. So you either create a chaotic system of no law at all, or you have to oppress one side or the other. And
a priest friend of mine made a point that I think has some validity. He says that since our government is so committed to for lack of a better word, woke agenda, that the churches are kind of compelled to fall into line because they're so dependent on government funding to support their charitable endeavors and other institutions. What's your feeling about that?
Well, organizations like Catholic Relief Services and Catholic Charities are almost entirely dependent on government funding to implement the programs that they apply for government grants for. And as a result, they wind up doing the bidding of the government over the bidding of the church. We find this time and again with regard to Catholic Relief Services, where we have conducted deep dive investigations into their various projects overseas, and we find them promoting programs that push contraception. We find them giving funds to organizations that are providing abortion or promoting abortion. They deny it. The CRS denies it on a regular basis, and they say things like, well, you know, these funds didn't go to that particular thing. But at the same time, I mean, just recently we did a big report on CRS's projects in Africa and found that CRS had produced its own document. And its logo is right there on the front cover, and inside the document, CRS was promoting masturbation as a form of safe sex. So there are serious problems with taking government money. We also discovered that Catholic Relief Services was implementing a government-created project. It was created by PEPFAR and USAID. The project is called DREAMS. And the number one goal, the purpose of DREAMS, is to increase the contraceptive method mix among young women. CRS even acknowledged that that was part of the goal of DREAMS in their own documentation. But what they do is they say, well, you know, we're just implementing this one little corner of it. We're not actually physically implementing these other corners that have to do with contraception. The problem with this is that as the lead implementing partner, they're hiring out or sectioning off these other portions, the contraceptive components, to other organizations, and they're saying, you handle this. But they're still enrolling girls in the program, and they're still referring girls to those other organizations, which means their hands are just as dirty as the ones who are physically handling the contraception itself. So it's a very serious problem. There's an old saying, if you take the king's shilling, you'll do the king's bidding. And that's exactly what's happening with CRS and Catholic Charities and a bunch of others.
Well, we do seem to be headed for some sort of crisis. We're getting pressure from abroad. The Chinese are becoming very aggressive, not only on Taiwan, but in terms of building a worldwide network of military installations, trying to undercut our economy. Here at home, we have this tremendous wave of immigration and a lot of general dissent from traditional Christian ethics and morality. What can the laity do to kind of help their clergy focus on these things and maybe put together some sort of a unified response?
Well, I think the first thing that the laity have to do is to make themselves aware of what's really happening. Our website, lepantoin.org, we do regular deep dive investigations into organizations like the ones we just discussed. There are other organizations like the Association of U.S. Catholic Priests, which are deeply heretical, promoting women's ordination and the LGBT ideologies. They go out into the culture of the United States and they start spreading these ideologies as if they are coming from the top. The laity have to be made aware. They have to understand what's happening, because you can't really address something when you're in the dark. So you have to make yourself aware. You have to educate yourself. The next step is to pray and fast, because what we're up against are demonic forces that are fighting inside our Catholic Church. And those demonic forces can only be cast out by prayer and fasting. So you bring the light, which is the information, and then you also pray and fast, and that's where the graces come to do what needs to be done. On top of that, you do whatever you can to educate your priests, to speak with your bishops, and to make sure that your Catholic funds are not going to the enemies of the Church.
Well, tell us a little bit about the Lepanto Institute. You're named for a famous naval battle. What's the nature of your activities?
Yeah, it was named after the Battle of Lepanto. The idea is that in 1571, the Church was facing three major crises: the crisis of Protestantism, heresy, and Islam, all three at the same time. And it was recourse to the Rosary that brought about the victory at that time. Well, the same three crises are facing Christendom today. And I would dare say even even more so than back then. So if it was the rosary that brought about the victory, and it was Our Lady who promised that, she encouraged us to pray the rosary in 1917, asked us to wear the brown scapular and to make the 5 first Saturdays. But she did specifically request that we pray the rosary, and that in the end, her Immaculate Heart would triumph. So what we're trying to do is to help Catholics to understand what is happening in the church and what is happening in the world so that they can make enough sense of it to navigate these difficult waters while constantly praying and making reparations for Our Lady, the sorrows that Our Lady carries. And it's through those prayers and that information, that's those supplications that we request, that we believe that Our Lady will bring about the victory.
And where can people go to find out more or to be in touch with you?
If they go to our website, lepantoin.org, that's lepantoin.org, sign up for our newsletter, and just pay attention to what we've got going on. If you look at our menu at the top of the website, you'll see we have a charity reports list of around 130 different charitable organizations that we have rated whether they're safe or not safe, and the criteria that we use is whether they're involved in the promotion of abortion, contraception, homosexuality, Marxism, or heresy.
Yeah, that's an important bit of information in itself. We don't hear a lot of that kind of analysis generally.
Yeah.
Michael Hichborn, the Lepanto Institute, thanks very much for talking with us today.
Thanks so much for having me on. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
They say travel is broadening. We discover new places, we meet new people, we learn about ourselves as we encounter new ways of living. People of faith have long known that travel can also be enriching to the soul. A trip undertaken for that purpose we often refer to as a pilgrimage. There are all kinds of places around the world to which pilgrims flock, and well-trodden paths that have accommodated spiritual travelers for centuries. My guest is Kenneth Strange. He's a former FBI agent who, with his wife Aurora, walked one of the most famous pilgrimage routes, the Camino de Santiago in Spain. He recorded their experiences in a book titled It's Your Camino, and he's here to tell us about it. Ken, thanks for speaking with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
What is the significance of the Camino de Santiago? Why is that so famous and special?
Well, that's a great question, and I would think it has a lot to do with its history. Camino itself means the way or path, and this path apparently was built actually by Roman slaves back in those times, and then in the Middle Ages became a very popular place to do the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, which is the ultimate destination. It's the shrine where the bones, supposedly, of St. James the Apostle are buried in this cathedral.
This is a very long walk. This is like 500 miles or something.
That's right. We did as I like to say, the whole enchilada. We did the 500 miles, and it took us 31 days. Although many people opt to go the last 60 miles or 100 kilometers because, if you do that, you can show proof that you walked the last 60 miles, you end up with a certificate in Latin saying that you completed the pilgrimage.
The Spanish term Camino, as you point out, means a road or a highway, and you live in California. You see that term all over the place. But what prompted you to undertake this pilgrimage?
It was something that I had always wanted to do. I had first learned about it. I read a book by James Michener called Iberia, and there's a chapter devoted to Santiago de Compostela. That was the first time. And then I was a language major. In 1975, I took a junior year abroad in Spain to learn Spanish. And, what's interesting, Bill, is when I was there for the 1 year, 75 to 76, 74 pilgrims made that pilgrimage. And when my wife and I did it in 2018, we were two of 327,000 pilgrims.
Whoa.
So it's really taken off. But, back to your question, we had visited Santiago de Compostela in 1985. We were there for just a day or two and really didn't see much activity. We didn't see any pilgrims. Then we went off. We went through life, and we had jobs and children and careers. And then finally, after I retired from my corporate gigs in the private sector, we ran into Martin Sheen, the actor. He was doing some volunteer work in Mexico, in Tijuana to be exact, in a parish, a very poor parish. And we met him there, and he said, Ken, Aurora, I made the movie The Way. My son, Emilio Estevez, directed it, and you two should really go. You should really go. And so we decided maybe a year later to do that.
Now, that route traverses Spain, and Spain is a very varied landscape. It's everything from coastland to desert to mountains to plains. It must have been pretty physically demanding to walk that distance over different kinds of territories and probably in all kinds of weather.
No, you're exactly right. We chose to do it in one of the better seasons, which was spring, in May to be exact. The other season to do it in, I understand, is early fall. Otherwise, you get into severe winters and very, very hot summers. But it was a physical, emotional, mental challenge. We're not spring chickens. I was 62. My wife was 61. My knees, I had tendinitis. I had arthritis in the knees. So we enjoyed going up mountains and up hills, but coming down them or going down them was very, very difficult. And there was one point in the beginning where I almost gave up. But right in the beginning, and it was coming down off the Pyrenees, and I said, I'm screwed. I think that's it for me. And my wife's a nurse, and she had some Aleve and some compresses, and so we just kind of sat it out, talked about it, took the Aleve, and just kept going.
I'm sure it poses many basic physical challenges, but beyond that, what is it that sets a trip like this apart from just a vacation or just going hiking or any sort of a mundane experience? It's a higher level somehow. What's the difference?
Yeah, no, that really, I think it has to do with the fact that you're traveling, really you're not on vacation. In essence, you're also traveling to a holy place or a shrine where you can pay homage to, in this case, St. James the Apostle. But it was kind of this blend. The pilgrimage itself was a blend of physical and spiritual. And we found ourselves spending a lot of time in deep reflection, in prayer, and kind of examining our lives, where we had been and where we were presently, where we were going in our lives. And not only that, Bill, but the beauty of it for me was it was a communal experience that we were celebrating this trip, this kind of this journey that we're all making together. We celebrated it with the other pilgrims. And for me, the other pilgrims was this kind of, I thought, this may sound corny, but I thought I rediscovered God through my fellow pilgrims.
How do you put something like this together? Did you work with a travel company, or did you lay out the accommodations yourself? How was it done?
Yeah, we did it ourselves. We did a lot of research, and we were reading travel books, and we're no strangers to hiking. We've pretty much been hiking since we've been married. We showed up at the beginning in the little village of Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in the Pyrenees, and we always found lodging during those 31 days. We found lodging everywhere we went. We would go from one village to the next village, and then when we would get there, we would ask the owners or the receptionist, could you call ahead to the next town and tell them we're coming? That's what we did. And there was only one exception where we could not find lodging in one village toward the end. And what we did is we backtracked, took a bus going back to that previous town, lodged there. In the morning, we took the bus back to where we had finished the previous day, and then we continued our journey.
Did you find that the local people were welcoming and encouraging, or do they distrust foreigners, or what's their attitude?
No, absolutely. We found them to be accommodating, hospitable. It may help that I'm fluent in Spanish.
Yeah.
I've always had an interest in Spain, so I think that was helpful. But by and large, people were very, very happy to interact with us. They were generous to a fault. The people of Spain are incredible people, by and large. Many of them make a living off the Camino, so, it behooves them to be pleasant and cordial and accommodating.
One certainly has to have a basic physical condition to undertake something like this, but if someone were to ask you what else they need to do to prepare, what would your advice be?
I would say you definitely would like, depending on which Camino you take. If you took the short Camino, the 60 miles, you wouldn't have to practice so much. But the 500 miles is really very difficult. What we did, Bill, is we practiced as much as we could every weekend for, I would say, about 6 months before the trip. Just about every weekend we would go hike. We would start with backpacks that with very little weight in it, and we would go a short distance. And then each time, every weekend we would go out, we would add more weight to the backpack, and we would increase the distance of the trip. So we worked our way up to it. And the other thing is, it's imperative to have decent footwear and clothing. We had excellent shoes. I had no blisters at all. My wife, I think, had one. But we saw people that were not as fortunate, that they were off the Camino for several days as they were nursing these blisters. And so I would say footwear is just, you have to have the best footwear you can afford, and you definitely need to practice.
Now, you have an interesting background in law enforcement and security, and you have written about that aspect of your life in another book. Tell us about that.
My father was a police officer in the New York Police Department. So, I grew up in the presence of police officers or cops, if you will. And so I was very comfortable in that world. Growing up, I thought, geez, I'd like to be like my father. He's a good man. He's one of the good guys. He's one of the people that likes to protect people and, give to people, the public. So, I thought maybe I would do that. But when I suggested that to him, he said, son, I didn't have a college education. I mean, he did eventually go back and get a college degree. But he said, you have a college degree now, and if you're thinking about law enforcement, why don't you consider the federal side? So, my career initially was to be a Spanish teacher, and I was a Spanish teacher for a few years. I ended up teaching Spanish and then going off to Saudi Arabia to teach English. And when I did come back to the States, went for a master's degree, I met an FBI agent who was at the university recruiting. And I thought to myself, you know what? I've had this journey with teaching, and it's been wonderful, but I have this, I think, a call to public service. And so I applied with the FBI and was accepted.
And that book is titled A Cop's Son, One G-Man's Fight Against Jihad, Global Fraud, and the Cartels. That's a pretty intimidating array of forces to oppose. It was wonderful to write the book. My father was gone. He had passed away the previous year before I wrote it, and he had such a wonderful career, a storied career, 38 years. He rose through the ranks, and in the end, we actually overlapped by 2 years. He was in New York. I was working in Newark, New Jersey. Occasionally I would take the train over and see him over in Manhattan, and we would have lunch, and it was I couldn't have scripted it any better. So, at the end of the day, I just thought, I want to write about my career and some of the stories and situations that I became involved in, but I also wanted to pay homage to my father. Well, where can people find out more about your writing and follow your activities? I have an author website, which is www.kennethstrange. That's one word, kennethstrange.com. And my books are out on Amazon, and the second book, The Cop's Son, is on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. I have a third book coming out, hopefully beginning of 2025, called The Land of Sand. And this is a coming-of-age love story set in the Middle East.
where I worked for 5 years.
Well, the book we're focusing on right now is It's Your Camino, One Couple's 500-Mile Pilgrimage Across Spain by Kenneth Strange. Ken, thanks very much for taking a few minutes and telling us about this. It sounds like a fascinating experience. I don't know if it's for everybody. It's pretty challenging, but it sounds like something that could really touch your life in a profound way.
Yeah, I recommend it for just about anyone and everyone. We found people on the Camino that were there for all kinds of reasons, to, find themselves, to lose themselves, for, spiritual, for just losing weight, or there were some people that, everybody's doing it, I need to do it. So, there's something on the Camino, I think, for everyone, and I would certainly encourage people to try it.
If you've been listening to these shows online but would like to hear them on the radio, tell your local Catholic station. Free Expression with Bill Castle is available for broadcast free of charge. Ask your Catholic station to contact us by email, billcastle@sbcglobal.net. That's BILLKASSEL, all one word, billcastle@sbcglobal.net. And don't forget to support your local station. In this time of censorship and so-called cancel culture, Catholic radio is becoming increasingly important as an alternative media source. Our programming is based on the Word of God and the teaching of His Church, and we bring you the factual, truthful information you aren't getting from the mainstream media. Support Catholic radio. Your generosity keeps Catholic outlets on the air, and donations to broadcast ministries can be tax deductible. Urge your friends and relatives to tune in as well. And please, let me know what you think about these shows. Tell me what books you're reading, what media you follow, what sort of music communicates with your soul. I'd love your suggestions on topics we might explore that touch the lives of Catholics today, important ideas we might discuss, interesting people we might speak with. Email me with your thoughts, billcastle@sbcglobal.net. Be with us next time when we explore other aspects of religious communication and look deeper into the great Christian heritage of free expression. Free Expression with Bill Castle is a production of Good Shepherd Catholic Radio and Company Publications, where good books, good music, and good radio are always good company. Dan Curris provided technical assistance. Theme and incidental music are by Dan Adam. The program was produced and directed by Bill Castle. This is Good Shepherd Catholic Radio.